Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Generational Growth Podcast, where we teach people to grow and give with abundance. Cat's out of the bag. Corporations and governments are not going to save us. Who would have thought? So this podcast is a tool to help you give strategies and procedures to help get you to your why quicker. Financial education is not taught simply, even at West Point, it's not taught. So this podcast exists to help employees and small business owners get to their why quicker. In this episode, we are talking with Ngoc. She is a CPA and she has a coaching business around helping CFOs as well too. So a very, very depthful knowledge in the accounting space. So this was a great episode. I hope you guys enjoy it, and let's get to it. Good afternoon, everyone. This is my friend Ngoc. We met I think it was earlier last year at a wealth building conference, the Aligned Wealth Experience with Life 180. We had some really cool connections there. So Ngoc, welcome to the show. Thanks for coming. She is a CPA, and she has even a coaching business for launching a coaching business for CPAs. So Ngoc, tell us a little bit more about your background. What's a good place to start to understand your whole journey as a business owner and CPA?
Well, my journey started in the corporate world. I have an accounting and finance degree, and went towards working for Ernst & Young, one of the big four firms, CPA firm, and that was my first job, was doing as an auditor for a big four CPA firm. Then I realized that wasn't the path after 3 years, so I left and went to work for one of my clients in accounting. Started out as an accounting manager there for a construction general contractor, home builder company. And from there, the market crashed. That was during the time when 2008 happened. So I was part of the Enron, Ernst & Young crash of the CPA world during that time. And then I was part of the market real estate crash during that time, also in the construction industry. So I was a controller for that company. Left that and went to work for a renewable energy company in wind power. Also became a controller for that company, and went to work for another company, litigation research, and managing the accounting department. So I've been like in all these management role, building accounting department. Went through a life-changing experience, of course, divorce. That always changes your life and how you see your career and where you're going, and as a wake-up call. And after the divorce, I realized I didn't want to be in corporate. So about 5 years ago, I walked away from corporate and started my own practice. So now I have a CFO accounting practice that I've been nurturing and scaling for the past 5 years when I walked away.
Awesome. I'm genuinely curious. So you mentioned you survived 2008. You were an accountant all through that matter. What was that like? I could only imagine, you have your book of business and things just collapse. Like, what happened and how did you dig out of that? What was it like?
So when I was in the corporate world and as an Ernst & Young auditor, in that context, or
yeah. So when you were with those companies, being an auditor and everything, like what happened? How did companies get out? What was it like?
Well, it was pretty crazy time. If you read in the news during that time, the whole collapse, the accounting, there was a lot of scandals, and that happened with a lot of these big companies, and that caused one of the big four CPA firm, well, one of the big five became a big four. And it was interesting observing how everything was going on, and how we had to absorb some of the accountants, auditors, and tax people into our own accounting firm. That was interesting. And then doing the market crash, that was also another wake-up call, where people were doing all the investment they were doing, and those mortgages that were not good. Everybody was being approved for mortgages that should not have been approved for mortgages. And so a lot of people lost their homes, and I was part of that, like, real estate crash too. So it was very interesting observing that. So just have these life changes experience observing how the market was and what was going on and how people's reaction, because it's a cycle. Everything's cycles. Like, you have the ups and the downs, and how do you ride those cycles? And right now, it's another cycle that we need to be aware of. And how are you positioning yourself and your business to be in this down cycle? And then what's going to happen when the up cycle happens again? So you just have to make sure you're, like, being able to manage that cycle.
Yeah, let's go on a tangent here. I want to pick your brain a little bit on this. So, you mentioned we're in potentially, an upcoming point of volatility, and you have to prepare for those moments of volatility. So, is your opinion that we're in an AI bubble or something along those lines?
Well, the AI is definitely changing a lot of the way we do business. And if we're not going to be able to adapt and learn from that, then we're going to be left behind. So,
Hmm.
how are you, any business owners, when you're doing business, when you're in corporate, it's a different kind of mindset. I was in corporate for 23 years. You're very sheltered when you're in corporate, right? You're not exposed to the things that an entrepreneur is exposed to. Because as an entrepreneur, you have to wear so many hats and you have
Hmm.
to like do lead generation, sales and marketing, so operations. So, because your company's small, you're doing all these tasks. And so you're constantly learning and adapting and adjusting. So as a small business owner, you have to always adapt and adjust. And right now we're in the AI, right? So where the AI industry is changing everything we're doing. I mean,
Hmm.
the way my business is, I have to constantly learn, like always going out to conferences, networking, meeting people, and taking courses to keep up with everything and work on my mindset, my personal development, investing myself and back into my business so that I can keep up with all the things that's going on.
Hmm.
And if you don't do that, you're going to get hurt. I mean, you're going to not be able to survive in business.
Yeah, I mean, I would definitely agree there. Some type of adoption I feel is going to be needed for most business owners. So, regardless of what the cause of the volatility is, what are some things that people can do to help prepare for volatility in the market? So, a large portion of my audience is, high income W-2 employees. That comes from my background. I was a former Army officer, and then the other half is really small business owners. So, talking to
Mhm.
those two audience, what are some things that we could do to prepare when things start to get a little shaky?
Well, on the context of high income earner, when I was in corporate, I was a high income earner, and I felt like I wasn't prepared to understand wealth and how to build wealth or having, I was trying to always try to do businesses on the side, but I never invested in like a personal development to really scale my business, right? So I was just dabbling on the side, had side businesses. But what I encourage people who are in corporate is that your job is not permanent. You're replaceable. All of us are replaceable. And you got to invest in yourself. At the end of the day, no matter what investment you do, the first investment is in yourself. Learn from people, have mentors and coaches that can guide you who walk the path that you want to walk, right? Because you have to have a backup plan. Always have a backup of a backup. Because if you don't and you're laid off and you're older, it's really hard to find a job. And then you're trying to figure out business. You don't know business. Business is not as easy as people think. Starting a business takes 3 to 5 years to build any kind of business. And for me, it took me 3 years to figure out, okay, what am I good at? What do I want to focus my attention on? Because I focus on all over the place. Right. And even though I focus on network marketing and this and that, I really, really understood business. And now where I intentionally focus on CFO services because that's my background. I was an accountant, I worked in corporate, I know how to do systems and processes. So I realized what am I good at? What problem am I solving for my client? And that was a cash problem. All of my clients had cash flow problem. So what I do is I go into their company, I look at the problems they have. Okay, how do I get them tax ready, making sure their accounting books are correct? How do I get them raise ready, building on the models, their present, their financial model, their pitch deck, etc., and get them raise ready? And then what's the exit ready? How do I get them to the exit strategy that they want? Do they want to go IPO? Do they want to get bought out, etc.? So for me, it's very intentional in what I do. So once I
Hmm.
raise the money, how do I manage that money? And then how do I make sure the processes are in place for cash flow wise so that they're profitable? Because again, lots of business owners, we think we know what we're doing, but we don't know what we don't know. And
Hmm.
so when we go in there trying to build a business, we're going to fail because we don't have all the knowledge.
Yeah.
Like even now, I still don't know what I don't know. So I'm always learning from people who are a step ahead of me or have different ideas and different strategies. So when I learn, I teach my clients.
Yeah, a lot of this you mentioned Financial education is not taught. It's not taught at schools. I got a West Point diploma behind my right shoulder, and it's not taught even there. The extent of our financial education ended with a Roth IRA calculator. So we got that career starter loan, which you may be familiar with. A lot of people get it when they're kind of like in the middle of their college services. And we just made a basic calculator on compounding interest for the Roth IRA. We got some, education around that, and that's light years ahead of most other colleges and programs. So it's not taught. You have to go on Bigger Pockets. You have to go on LinkedIn. You have to seek out mentorship and have calls with people to develop the systems and processes you need to be successful, because financial literacy and education is really not taught. So let's bring this back to your CPA story. You spent the last 5 years assembling your businesses or assembling your business. It took you 3 years to figure out really where you wanted to pinpoint at. Where are you at now, and what are the different services that you do?
Okay, so for my business, I have two avenues. One is, for me, at the end of the day, I want to help people be successful. I love helping my client. I have an amazing relationship with all my clients, right? So I have two paths. Do you want just the basic accounting where I do your accounting reconciliation, set up your books, etc., or do you want the robust kind, which is the CFO service? And what does that mean to be a CFO? A fractional CFO. So fractional CFO is someone who can come in and really be that partner for you and be there to be the second set of eyes and helping you with business strategy, guiding you and helping, supporting you in all the financial aspects, right?
Mm-hmm.
For me, it's like, how do I help you manage your money and making sure that you don't run out of money? And then if you run out of money, how do I find someone to get you the money you need and then put the strategies in place so then you have managed your cash flow?
Okay.
So for me, that avenue is very, very much more robust than just an accountant just doing your bookkeeping, right? And then I educate my client. At the end of the day, I'm always educating myself so that I can educate my client. And that's key, because a lot of CPAs were very narrow-minded or CFO where they don't have the business experience. They may have a corporate experience to come up and rise up to be a CFO, but they never did a business. For me, I did both paths. I had multiple businesses on my own that I built by myself. And then I also went the corporate path. And then I tried so many network marketing businesses. So then I have a whole breadth of experience and connection and network that I can bring back to my client to support them whatever they need.
Okay. Something that stuck out the last time we chatted when you were talking about your business and everything, you want to change the way CPAs think, and that ties into, that CFO branch that you were just telling about. So what are some major things you see CPAs get wrong, and what are you trying to change there?
So for CPAs, coming back to accounting, what is accountant? What's a accounting degree versus finance degree versus a CPA, right? So there's all these terms that we talk about, right? Accounting only looks at current number and history number. What are we accounting for? What did you spend, et cetera, et cetera. A CFO or financial person, right, does looking forward, forecasting, et cetera. Like, okay, what are you doing? What's projection? And how do you project your future spending? So now how do you connect the dot between the accountant and the CFO, the financial person, to give strategies? So for me, it's like this, the accountant is we're so narrow-minded. We're not open. A lot of us are very closed, and we feel like the CPA degree, yes, is a hard-earned degree. You have to take 150 units, you have to pass 4 parts of the exam, and then you have this accounting degree, but it doesn't make us rich because we're not learning wealth strategies. We're not learning ways to help support our client in the way they need us to support them. It's not just doing a tax return or just putting numbers on a spreadsheet. How do you look at the client's business and help support them in their goals and what they want to do? What do they want? What's the end result of every business? Because when I go work with a client, I ask them, what's the end game you want to achieve? Do you want to pass this on to your kid? Do you want to have an exit strategy? You want to be bought out? Do you want to go public? What is it that you want? And what's the number that you want to achieve? And then we work backward and setting the right structure, right, and the right process and systems to get us there. Because every client is different. Every client's education is different. Every client's experience is different. So then how do you work with each client to make sure that you're understanding your client and what they need and where they want to go.
So what were some big pieces of education that you follow? I'll make a jujitsu analogy. I'm a brown belt in jujitsu. It's a big part of my life. And an analogy I like to say is black belt, the end belt that you get is just the starting point to the race that has no end. That is the starting point of the race. And I feel like that's kind of adjacent to the CPA title. You do all this work, you get your quote unquote black belt, your title, but then that's just the start. You got to keep on developing, learning. And that's something you mentioned time and time again. You put a lot of education or effort into self-education so you could help your clients. What are some things that you did in that education process, continuous education process, that helps set you apart from other CPAs?
Oh my, if I share with you my education journey, I invested probably over $300,000 in my own self-education.
Really?
Mhm.
Wow.
And
Okay.
because I'm constantly going to learn at networking event, business event, part of different groups, like learning what they're teaching me. And then I said, oh, that's what you're teaching. And then I start seeing the commonalities of that. So as a business owner, what do you need to work on? The most important thing is your mindset. What
Yeah.
is your mindset teaching you? So I went through Landmark, I went through Hardcore Leadership. I've been part in so many communities and investing in many communities to really understand the mindset and the heart set, the soul set. What is it that about me that sets me different, and how do I relate to my client? How do I work on my business mindset, my communication, and my relationship with my client? How do I say certain things that every one of client wants to work with me? They see me, they say, oh yes, you're the one that I've been looking for, and that I want to work with you because you get it, you understand, you can connect the dot for me. And that's where a lot of accountants can't connect the dot, like from the numbers to the business to the relationship to how do you help a company grow and scale and be sustainable. At the end of the day, every business owner, what do they want to be able to make money, right? They want to make sure they have a retirement plan so that they don't work forever.
Yeah.
So if you understand that, how do you help your client get to that level, right? In building out the things you need to build so they don't have to worry.
Okay. So tying in, how we met at the Aligned Wealth Experience with Life 180, and life insurance IMO. So were you going there for education, expanding your network? What was your kind of entry point into that? Were you trying to learn certain lessons, or what
Yes.
was
So
the
one,
draw?
interesting enough, when I left the corporate world, I realized that I call myself the pissed off CPA on a
Yeah.
mission, right?
Yeah.
Why is it on a mission? Is because we don't know what we don't know. And
Yeah.
I was like, I was taught the normal way, put money in 401k. I put money in retirement since I was like 19. I
Hmm.
had a 401k since I was 19. I was putting myself through college, working full time, going to school full time, working at crazy shit. So I had this retirement account since I
Yeah.
was 19, right?
Hmm.
So I never realized, why is my money never growing the right way? There's ups and downs and etc. It's like, why? I put a lot of money in all these retirement accounts, but I realized that I didn't know anything about building wealth because I was going the more normal path of putting money in retirement account. I never learned wealth strategies. I never learned life insurance. I never know there's all these things that you can do. Because why? Because we get comfortable in life. You get married, you have kids, you're still doing everything you do every single day trying to survive. And I live in San Francisco Bay Area, so it's very expensive. Then when I went through a divorce, everything reset. So you're on one income living in the Bay Area. So everything that's my wake up calls. Like, I never learned how to build wealth. So
Yeah.
then I got my life insurance. And so I went into life insurance and realized, what are these life insurance people doing? They're also regurgitating information. They don't know what they're doing, and they're just feeding information to the client what they were taught, and they're not looking at strategy. So when I went through about 3 IMOs in 3 years,
Really?
literally
Okay.
just like, this
Wow.
doesn't make sense, this doesn't make sense, this doesn't make sense. So then it's like trying to find the right group that makes
Hmm.
sense, because I was reading and learning, and it's like, and then taking my own experience as an accountant and saying how people are running their business, it just didn't make sense to me. So I
Yeah.
walked away from a lot of IMOs where it's like,
Yep.
okay, this doesn't align with who I am. So when I met the Line Wealth Group, it's like, okay, I see this strategy. So now that makes sense. Not every life insurance strategy is the right strategy for everybody. It just depends on what is it that they want. At the end of the day, it's what is it they want and how is that going to help them in the things that you're doing. IUL may be good for some people, not for everybody. Whole life may be good. So it just depends on your strategy. And you have to meet your client where they're at versus trying to push product and not really understanding the detriment to them at the end of the day is that you need to make sure you take care of your client. It's
I'm
not the
glad that
money, it's
you
the client.
I'm glad that you said that. It's people tend to get so dogmatic and almost tribal in their ideologies around insurance or different wealth building strategies, right? You definitely see that with the whole life versus IUL debate, but I think there you get a lot of clarity off of starting with the end state, get a clear picture of what the client is trying to do, and then backwards plan to develop the plan that's right for them. But yeah, we had lots of overlaps, just kind of starting off in 401ks. That was my journey. I saved or invested around 50 to 70% of my income per year since I was 17. And my strategy was just dollar cost average the market. So I was in the military at the time, active duty. So I maxed out my TSP 401k equivalent, maxed out my Roth. And then I was using a high yield savings account to save from my rentals, but, no leverage or tax benefits with that route. And that led me into whole life. And that's what I used to scale my turnkey portfolio because, there's leverage in a tax planning inside there. So that helped me move in a more efficient way. But I'm curious, when you entered the insurance space, you mentioned you did 3 IMOs in 3 years, which is nuts, finding that right team. So what was your entry point? Like, what did you not like about the first place that you landed at and those first few companies that you were with?
So the IUL, I was in the IUL space, and then I
Okay.
got sucked into the IUL world of this is it. This is the only thing that works, right?
Mm,
And then I realized what turned me off was that these people are just so rah about like a status thing. Like, like they go to conferences and like it makes it feel like they're better than you.
yeah.
And then there's all these drama that comes with life insurance and all these people, these agents, like you're trying to make money and they're doing the things they're doing. And I felt like it wasn't like honest.
Mm,
So that's why I keep walking away from strategies that just didn't feel right for me and how they are running their business. And, so it's just like, it just turned me off in terms of the group that I was with and what they were doing, right? So it's like, there's just too much drama. I just don't like drama. So then
yeah.
that's why I walked away. But for me, I have an IUL. I love my IUL.
Mhm,
I use the IUL for living benefits because I know that
mm,
if I have cancer, stroke, heart attack, something, I know that's a strategy that's good for me and that there's a backup plan for me in case something happens to me.
yeah.
I use the whole life to pay for my son's college education. So I put
Mhm,
money in there, take it out, borrow against it. So that whole life strategy is really for other things that I do. So that's why for me, it's like, what is it that you're going to use this for? And how does it align with who you are and what you want to do? Right?
yeah.
Because every insurance have its place in this world. You just have to know how are you using that insurance.
Yeah, yeah. Let me pick your brain for a little bit. So my core strategy that I mentioned is I pair whole life with turnkey real estates. So every 2 to 3 months I do a transaction. I really like the hands-off model, so that's why I do the turnkey real estate. This is the kind of analogy that I've formulated my opinion on. If we're constantly applying leverage, I like to use whole life as that base because
Mhm.
it's kind of like building a house on a foundation of concrete versus a foundation of quicksand, something that's subject to change. That's what an
Mhm.
IUL is, the
Mhm.
cash value is subject to change. That may not be bad based on your end state, but if I'm constantly applying leverage, doing a transaction every 2 to 3 months, I really like to have that whole life base. Is that
Mhm.
something that you would agree with? I really want
I
to pick your
totally
brain as
agree
a,
with it because the
okay.
IUL was pushed where, hey, you're gonna have this much return, et cetera, et cetera. That's not true. You
Yeah.
don't have that much return depending what it is, what index you're in, et
Mm,
cetera, right? So for me, I'm not using that to do the things that I want to do as like real estate or even your own funding your own business or
mhm,
even paying for your kids' college education and tuition, et cetera.
yeah.
That to me, the whole life is much more stable. Like you know what the return is going to be that you're going to get from it somewhat, versus the IUL up and down stuff. You kind of know and what you're borrowing against it at, right? Because when you're borrowing money, you're not paying taxes on it. It's a loan, right?
Mhm.
So then it's a better, more leverage strategy is more safer for me as a strategy to do what we want to do as leveraging versus using an IUL. An IUL for sure, I only use it for living benefits. I know
Okay.
that that's my backup plan. That is in case something happens to me, that's a backup plan that I use for the IUL.
Okay, that makes sense. That was going to be my follow-on question, but awesome, sweet. I appreciate you digging in there a little bit. Let's transition and talk about the coaching program that you're starting for CPAs. Tell me a little bit more about where you're at with that process and everything. I think that's really cool.
For me right now, there is a massive need because even though we have a CPA, doesn't mean that we make good money.
Mm,
And we're like always working, like it's constant work. Let's say you're a CPA in the corporate world. You
yeah,
have this great title, but at the end of the day, you're still an employee.
sure.
That was my wake up call. It's like, I will never get an ownership in a company because I'm still at the end of the day, I'm an administrative side of the corporate financials, right? I'm an
Mm,
admin support. So that was a wake up call where it's like, why are these officers making so much money? They're younger than me, and I'm never ever going to be rich working in corporate. I know that.
yeah.
So for me, that's why I left because I knew that there was something more for me out there and doing what I want to do. And then going to a CPA who have their own practice, at the end of the day, we're still working, we're still trading our time for money. So how do you create a process and a system where you earn a ownership in each of the company that you work for?
Hmm.
Right. So for me, having a CFO, fractional CFO, I get to be owner of these clients of mine. They get me a percentage ownership. So imagine all I need is a little percentage here and there to
Okay.
be able to be a part of the helping them grow and scale their company and have ownership in each of these companies that I help grow and scale and raise money and all the things. So I'm part of the leadership and I'm
Uh-huh.
part of owning the company. So that's where the mindset of a CPA has to switch. You have to be able to have an ownership in the clients that you support somehow, some way, get yourself in that strategy. And so for me, the coaching business hasn't started yet, but my plan is how do I teach CPAs to be in that strategy in the sense of being a CFO for clients and
Mhm.
being able to get an ownership of the business.
Yeah, it kind of goes back to that mindset discussion that we had, shifting from that employee mindset to the ownership mindset, because once you become an owner, a lot of benefits tend to unlock. I think we see that a lot in the real estate world. If you're renting, you're not building any equity. There's no tax advantages really with that. But when you shift to owning your personal property or owning rentals, well, we got depreciation, we got the cash flow, we got the appreciation, we got the tax benefits inside there. So there's a big difference between the employee mindset and the ownership mindset, and a lot of different advantages come with that. So, what is your plan to kind of? You mentioned you want to develop this program and teach all these lessons. Like, what's the plan to help push some of the knowledge that you have in your head? Like, what is your structure? How do you plan to do all this?
So right now, my plan is first of all raising capital for my clients. Right, I have
Mm.
some part-time people that I'm training. I'm training my son in my business. He just graduated from college, so he's getting certification in some accounting software. So I'm coaching a lot of young
Oh, sweet.
students. So here's the challenge of that people coming out of college. They're having a hard time finding jobs.
Mm.
Truly hard time because the market is completely different. It depends when you graduate, where the market, the industry is in finding jobs. If you're lucky, you have lots of experience back then, it's easier for you to find jobs. Kids now who graduate from top university are struggling to find jobs. This is all my son's friends
Yeah.
graduating from top university and can't find jobs for a year. I mean, it's crazy. So
Yeah.
what I'm doing is I'm creating a program for students who are interested in learning from me and coaching them, making sure that they have the right mindset, making sure they have the right skill set, like getting the certification for the accounting software that I use, and then
Mm.
coaching them and training them and building them so that they have some sort of experience. So when the market turns, they can find a job. If not, they can work for my client. So I'm coaching these students to be able to have a job, work with me, right? And then also eventually place them in my client's company because I'm
Okay.
building out accounting departments. So each
Okay.
of my client that I raise capital for, their accounting department's going to grow. So I need to
Mm.
staff those accounting department with people. So for me, it's building them from the beginning and
Yep.
getting them to find jobs and placing them in the client. So that's really my strategy. So how do I can nurture these students, give them a sense of like learning and belonging, coach them, and then get them into jobs.
Very cool. Very, very cool. I see the structure. That's pretty sweet. You mentioned that you did a bunch of capital raising. I know that's something we chatted on last time, and you learned a lot and you moved pretty fast here in the past, like even less than 12 months. So tell me a little bit more about that journey. What that wasn't really your background, but it's something that you learned and had a lot of success with really
Mhm.
rapidly. So tell us a little bit more about that.
So what I realized when I was doing all these network marketing business and all these groups that I was part of, and then I have a handful of accounting clients, I realized all of them have the same problem. Every business owner have the same exact problem,
Mm.
cash flow. So how do you have cash flow in the business and making sure that you have profitability and don't run out of money? So that's why I created the CFO service and where I help them looking at the challenges that they have. And then how do I build out the model to raise capital for them? Right. And then being able to do, once I raise the capital, what's the strategy so I put in place to make sure they don't run out of that money? So
Okay.
that's where the CFO service comes in to make sure that that transition and for me that was solving that there was a pain point. Like, how do I make sure that they don't run out of money, right? And that's so important because a lot of us even myself as an entrepreneur, I struggled in building my business. Like
Mhm.
imagine I had a high income, I start from zero. It's like if you start from zero, like, what do you do? How do you also bring in the business, right? How do you make sure that you have the skill sets and bring in the lead generation? And how do you make sure you build those clients that come in? It's the same process in every business.
Yep.
Everybody has the same process. So how do I make sure that I put the right structure in place to help support them in what they're doing?
Very cool. Very, very
Mhm.
cool. I want to make sure that we have enough time to get to this portion, but let's transition and talk about some CPA tax tips, if you will. I mentioned a lot of my audience is high income W-2 folks, someone with a
Mhm.
similar story to my background, and then also small business owners as well, too. So let's talk about those employee or high income W-2 people that are maybe starting their own business or they're still kind of in their corporate job. What can those individuals do to help set themselves up the best way from a tax perspective?
Always have a side business or a side hustle.
Mm.
Always, like no matter what, when I was in corporate, I always had a side business. I was doing something to write tax off,
Mm.
right? So I had a tea business, I had a water business, I had an outsourced business, I had a jewelry business. I
Oh,
always had
damn.
a business that I wrote something off,
Yeah.
right? And even writing off my ex's education for MBA program, there's strategies to write things off. You have to shift some of your personal stuff that you're doing that you are using for your business and write off,
Hmm.
those deductions. For instance, if I was going on vacation and I'm traveling on a personal vacation, I can't write that off,
Hmm.
right? But if I do it my virtual business, which is where now my business is all virtual, I can work anywhere. Take
Yeah.
my laptop, I need my Wi-Fi, I need my backup monitor and my battery, etc. I can work anywhere. So I take my laptop, I can be in a Hawaii or somewhere and work from there and write off my trip, part of my trip that are business related, pro rata share of that and my meals and so there's things that you can write off. My laptop, if I didn't have a business, I wouldn't be able to write off my laptop.
Yep.
I use my laptop to do my business. I use my phone, my expenses to do my Wi-Fi, so there's so many things that people aren't writing off at a W-2 because you're just paying the standard rate,
Hmm.
right? So why do people who are multimillionaire pay so less taxes? Because there's strategies behind that to write off your taxes. And for instance, let's look at retirement planning. If you think that taxes is going to go up, why do you put money into a retirement plan and not pay taxes? Why are you deferring that?
Hmm.
Right? So you have to understand what's your end goal. If you think taxes is going to go up, pay the taxes and earn everything that's tax that tax free. You already pay for it. So make sure your money is earning so that you're not paying tax later. So you have to look at the strategy. How do you do estate planning, making sure that when you pass on generational wealth, making sure you don't pay taxes on it. That's why wealthy people, they're smart. They're surrounded by a bunch of like their big team. They pay a lot of people for their professionals, their attorneys, their CPAs, everybody that's around them. They're giving them strategies so they pay less taxes. Corporate people, W-2 people, we don't know that you can deduct a lot of these things.
Yeah.
Like hiring your own kid. My son used to do, he's working with me. He was helping me doing accounting, data entry when he was little. So I was paying him to do some data entry for me, right? So there's so many ways that we can write off taxes that we're not taught how to write off taxes.
Yeah,
That's
tax
the
code.
number one thing that we need to learn is how do we strategize and write off taxes?
Yeah, my two big lessons were when I was really getting my financial education, previous to what I was doing before, was the importance of leverage and taxes. Using other people's money, I use life insurance company money for my turnkey scaling, and then taxes. The best way to make money is to not lose it. And you mentioned a lot on, tax code 162, all those different deductions that you could get once you start your business, but we really can't unlock a lot of that unless if you have your business. So you mentioned one thing there. This is a really good question I wanted to ask. You mentioned, if you think taxes are going to go up, don't go, don't eat those taxes later. Is there any case to where you would reverse that answer? I interface with a lot of surgeons, and, they may be in a super high income bracket, but, maybe they're only going to be a full-time attending for, let's say, 7 to 10 years. Then they're going to cut off and their income is going to significantly drop. And, they may have a side business that they're doing, but, because that income drops off so much later on, would you say max out a 401k, the traditional 401k for them so they could get some of that tax benefit and then still be okay later on? What's your opinion?
It depends. Everybody, like I say, it depends what is their strategy that they have in place, right? And this is where a lot of us don't think of our life. Like our life, how many years do you think we're going to work until that we have left to work? And from there, how many years do you think we're going to live until? Because we're living longer and longer. And then if you're going to run out of money.
Yep.
Right? That's where a lot of the challenge with a lot of us is why do you see so many older people going back to work? Is because they were never taught wealth strategy. They were never taught how to look at money differently, to plan. And then you have what eats away from our money. How do we build wealth? What's a wealth formula, right? You need money, time, rate of return, right? So then what else eats away from it? Taxes and inflation, health, right? So if you look at that wealth formula and understand that, how do you mitigate all these things? How do you mitigate inflation? How do you mitigate tax? How do you mitigate health issues, right? So that's where those are the risks that you need to look at. And how do you plan? Okay, if I'm going to work for another 10, 20 years, when the time I retire, how much do I have that is able to sustain the kind of life that I want?
Yeah.
Okay. So after that, and then we pay, and then when our kids are older, we don't have the kind of tax deductions we think we have. If we're going to pay all our house, our equity is sitting in the house, it's not working for us. And so then you don't have the tax deduction. So then your tax deduction is going to be less, right? So people think they're going to pay less taxes. Maybe they're going to pay more taxes. Who knows? But that's why it has to be so important that you kind of look forward and then plan backward. Look at where you're going to be 10, 20 years from now. Are you saving enough for that? And then how much money you think you need and how much longer you think you're going to live? Because we can't predict that.
Yeah.
But we know that there are risks that we have to mitigate: tax risk, inflation risk, and health cost risk.
Yeah.
Because the older you are, the more risky it is. You don't know you're going to get cancer, stroke, heart attack, whatever, right? So how do you mitigate those risks and put things in place?
Yeah, that makes, sometimes I hate that answer. It's case by case dependent, but honestly, you have to look at the full picture and really get an understanding of that person, because it could make sense for one person, but it may not make sense for another person, depending on their goals and what they're trying to do and how long they're trying to work, how long they're templating those passive income years for. So yeah, it is a case by case basis. We really pinned on the employee, high income W-2 employee section. specific to small business owners, is there anything, we talked a lot about deductions and everything, making sure you're getting those deductions. Is there anything that you would really recommend small business owners to look at for general tips?
Yes, make sure you make money. Build. So my company is called Build Profit First, and I
Yeah.
love the philosophy of build profit first. Right. I came across this book, and it really, like, when I was in corporate, I used to do Build Profit First in a spreadsheet for 8.5 years,
Mhm.
managing a big company's money with this philosophy on Excel spreadsheet. And when I read that book, I was like, oh my gosh, if there was a system to manage your money, to make sure you make profit and manage your cash, how do you do that? And so for me, every one of my client, I put them through the accounting software I have. I use the banking software. So I have a system of every client. How do I onboard them to my process and my system to make sure that they build profit, and then put that money aside to do the strategies that you want to do, right? Making sure that you protect that money and don't touch it no matter what. You get tempted, but don't touch that money.
Mhm.
Right. So, because a lot of us, and when we're doing our business, we always touch that emergency fund. We got to make sure that profitability is put aside, that emergency fund is put aside, and don't touch it. So, if anyone who wants to learn about it, I'm happy to teach and put the process and system in place for them.
I love it. Hey, I only have a few more minutes here, but I wanted to pick your brain too on this topic too. So, what's your opinion of whole life in the business lane? So, I use whole life a lot with my personal life, a personally owned policy that I use to go buy those turnkeys, like I was mentioning. But
Hmm.
what's been enlightening for me, and that's how I kind of shaped my business. The initial portion of my business was just working with real estate investors, really just
Hmm.
showing them, I'm like, hey, I was doing this before, and now look what I'm doing. It's essentially a high yield savings account on steroids with
Hmm.
you protect your capital, you get that guaranteed rate of return plus the death benefit, you get the tax advantages inside there, and then you get the leverage capability. So when you're doing kind of a T-chart analysis between a high yield savings account and using a whole life policy, if it's structured the right way, it's kind of a night and day difference. And that's what allowed me to scale in a much more
Hmm.
efficient manner. But what's been enlightening for me is the business side of that too. You could still have a whole life chassis in different business plans. So
Hmm.
something I've been doing a lot of is like key person insurance or executive bonus arrangement 162 or cash balance plans. If the entity structure is correct, those premiums, the amount of money that you're putting in could be a dollar for dollar write-off against the active income, which of the business, which is mind blowing. Like I wish I could do that on the personal side, but the entity structure isn't right. So what's been your experience working with some of those advanced plans, and what's your opinion coming from a CPA?
Well, at the end of the day, it's all about the strategies, right?
Hmm.
And that's where a lot of us miss, is that we don't learn wealth strategies. And those are awesome because it again depends on the client too. Every client's different. Do they have the funds to put those strategies in place? In the beginning, my clients don't, right? Because we're just still trying to survive. We're still trying to put these processes, we're trying to raise capital, etc. But once they're in a better space, then now we're looking at strategies. What's the right strategy for them to make sure that at the end of the day, if the business owner is a one-person business, what happens if something happens to him?
Yeah.
What's the backup plan for that business to survive and all those employees that are there? I hear so many stories that the owners die, and then what happens? There's no backup
Hmm.
plan, there's no estate planning, there's no strategies for the continuation of the business. So what you're sharing is, again, strategies to make sure that you protect the business in case something happens to the business owner. So
Yeah.
the officers, the people, the management team that is driving that business. So that's why it's important we look at strategies.
Hmm.
End of the day, everything, your personal life is like a business. You have to look at strategies. How do you build wealth? How do you make sure you make it, save it, and protect it?
Yep. Yeah, and we interface with a lot of small business owners. That's something I see time and time again. That's probably one of the more popular things I work with is that key person insurance because, especially in that small business world, you may have a situation to where everything resides on one or two employees, and that is a huge issue. What if something happens to that person? And what's cool is, you could have the plan that key person insurance is in the chassis of a whole life. So you have all the benefits that we talked about before while protecting the business at the same time, which I think is so cool.
Mhm.
If we rewind the clock 5, 6 years ago, Never would I have thought I've geeked out or would be geeking out so much on life insurance, but it is so cool the different things that you could do with everything. I'm sorry we're going to bust time. This is all the time that we have. But quickly, can you please tell us a little bit more about how to reach you? Tell us a little bit more about your website, your programs. How can we get a hold of you?
Well, you can always find me at my own website is NgocTran.com. So that's one of my website, and there's a calendar link there. You can book time on my calendar, and we can have a discussion on like what is it you need and what you're planning to do, right? So for me, it's like how do I help support more business owners and change the way they think about their business? And how do they make sure that they have a backup plan for their life? Because at the end of the day, we all want the same thing. Why do we in business? We're in business because we want to make money. We'll make sure we have a good lifestyle, make sure we protect that and pass it on to our kids or whatever we want to do. So that's so important that you get yourself into better positions and learn from people who've walked the path.
I love it. I love it. Thank you so much for your time. This was super fun to pick your brain and get into the weeds.
Okay, you're welcome.